The music had already begun when the Duke of Callowmere put out his hand, and the room went so still that he could hear the candle flames working. He had not planned it. That was the thing he would turn over afterward, in the small hours, like a coin he could not spend. He had crossed the length of his own ballroom without deciding to, past the Marchioness of Dean, past 4 unmarried daughters arranged like a hand of cards, and stopped in front of a woman in a grey silk gown that had been turned twice and made over once. And he had held his gloved hand as the last dance of the evening struck up. 300 people saw it. 300 people knew what it meant. She did not. "Your Grace," said Miss Honora Renfell, and she looked at his hand with an expression he would remember for the rest of his life. Not triumph, not calculation, only a kind of startled kindness, as though she had been asked to carry something heavy for a stranger and could not think of a reason to refuse. Then she laid her fingers on his, and the county of Callowmere drew a breath as one animal. Somebody's fan hit the parquet. Nobody picked it up. "Sir," she said quietly, as he turned her into the first figure, "have I done something?" "You have accepted me," said Theodoric Vane, 9th Duke of Callowmere, and heard his own voice come out flat and strange, the way it did when he was afraid, which was seldom enough that he had trouble recognizing it. "Accepted your invitation. Yes." It seemed rude to refuse in front of everybody. "No." The pattern of the dance took her from him and gave her back. Her hand returned to his, warm through 2 layers of kid. "In this house, Miss Renfell, the last dance is not asked. It is offered, once. By the master of Callowmere, before the assembled county, and to take it is to answer a question that has not been spoken aloud." She was smiling politely, the way a woman smiles when she believes she is being teased by a man with no talent for it. "And what question is that, Your Grace?" He looked at her. Grey eyes, unremarkable brown hair pinned by someone in a hurry, a chin that did not tremble. 24, perhaps. A dependent cousin of the Fulbrights, brought along to hold shawls and be grateful. "Marriage," he said. Her feet went on with the figure. That was the first thing he ever admired about her, that her feet went on. Her face emptied of colour so completely that he thought she might go down, and her hand in his did not so much as flinch, and she finished the turn and came round to face him with her chin exactly where it had been. "That is not a custom," she said. "That is a trap. It is 400 years old. So is the plague, Your Grace. It is not a recommendation. Something happened in his chest that he had no word for. He was 38 years old. He had buried a father who had never once said his name with affection, and he could not remember the last time anyone had spoken to him as though he were a man in the room rather than a monument in it. "You did not know," he said. "I did not know." Her voice was very low. She was looking, he realized, not at him but past his shoulder, at the ring of watching faces, at the fans that had stopped moving, at his Aunt Lady Marchmain standing by the great chimney-piece with her mouth in a line like a closed door. "They are all looking at me. Yes. Because they think I have. Because you have." The violins climbed. Around them the county danced badly, because the county was not attending to its feet. "Then I shall simply say so," she said. "I shall say I did not know, and everyone will laugh, and it will be a story they tell at Christmas, and I shall go back to Cousin Fulbright's and mend stockings, and it will all be, no, Your Grace. Listen to me." He drew her in for the turn, and his voice went down to nothing, to a place under the music where only she could follow it. "If you disavow it, you announce to 300 witnesses that you took the Duke of Callowmere's hand in his own house and then refused him. You will not mend stockings. You will not be received, not at Dean, not at Harrogate, not at any table between here and London. Your cousins will feel the draught of it and put you out, because they are the sort of people who feel draughts." Her lips parted. "And if I disavow it," he went on, "if I stand in the middle of my own floor and say the woman who took my hand mistook the thing entirely, then I am a man who offers his name and withdraws it, before the county, for the amusement of the county. My father would have done it. It would have cost him nothing. It would cost me everything I have spent 11 years trying to be." The music was ending. He could feel it ending in his shoulders. "So we are caught," she said. "We are caught." The last chord fell. He bowed. She curtsied, deeply, correctly, a girl in a made-over gown with nothing in the world. And she did it with such straight-backed composure that a man near the door said, well, in a tone of real surprise. Then Theodric took her hand and lifted it, and turned with it to the room, and the room, having no notion what else to do, applauded. She was shaking. He could feel it in her fingers, one long fine tremor, like a struck glass. "Smile, Miss Renfell," he said, without moving his mouth. "I am smiling," she said, without moving hers. "It is the worst thing I've ever done with my face." And the Duke of Callowmere, who was reputed throughout 3 counties to be cold, exacting and entirely without humour, discovered that he was in some danger of laughing. The library, 1 hour later. The house was emptying itself in a long, slow, scandalized murmur of carriage wheels. He had put her in the wing chair by the fire because she had gone the colour of paper, and she had refused brandy, and refused sherry, and accepted tea, and now sat holding the cup in both hands without drinking any of it. Lady Marchmain stood in the doorway with the air of a woman who had been sent for the constable and had found none. "Theodric, a word. You may have several, aunt. In the morning. The girl is a Fulbright dependent." "The girl," says Renfell to the fire, "is a Renfell, ma'am, of no particular consequence, and can hear you perfectly well." Lady Marchmain's chin came up. Theodric watched, with an interest he did not entirely trouble to conceal, as his aunt discovered that the little grey person in the wing chair was not going to be spoken over. "You will not tell me," said Lady Marchmain, "that this was accident." "I shall tell you nothing at all, ma'am, since you have plainly settled it already, and I should hate to inconvenience you with facts. There was a silence of a very particular quality." "Aunt," said Theodric, "good night." She went. The door closed with restraint, which from Lady Marchmain was the equivalent of a slammed one. Miss Renfell set the tea down. Her hands, he noticed, were no longer shaking. They had the raw pink knuckles of a woman who did other people's mending in a room without a fire. "She will tell everyone I contrived it," she said. "She will. Did you?" The question landed in the middle of the room like a dropped plate. He turned from the fire and looked at her, and she looked back, steadily, without apology, a woman who had nothing left to lose and had evidently decided to spend it. "I beg your pardon. You are the Duke of Callowmere. You have known that custom since you could walk. You crossed a room full of eligible young women. I counted, your grace. One has time to count when one is holding the shawls. You crossed past every one of them, and you gave your hand to the only person in the room too ignorant to know what it meant." She lifted her chin. "So. Did you contrive it?" He was quiet a long moment. "No, I did not." "Then why?" And there it was, the question he had been walking away from all evening, down the length of his ballroom, past the 4 daughters like a hand of cards. Because the Marchioness of Dean had been telling her girls, in a carrying whisper, that the Duke was very cold but the house was very warm, and one could not have everything. Because at supper Lady Emmeline Harrow had asked him, with shining eyes, how many windows Callowmere had, and had not asked him one single question about himself. Because for 11 years he had stood at the head of his own table and watched people fall in love with his roof. Because he had turned sick of it, and seen a woman in grey silk standing by a pillar with 2 cashmere shawls over her arm, and she had not been looking at the chandeliers, or the Gainsboroughs, or the gilt, or him. She had been looking at a very old man asleep in a chair in the corner, and she had gone quietly and put a footstool under his feet, so that he should not wake with his ankles swollen, and then gone back to her pillar, and nobody in that room of 300 people had seen her do it, except him. "Because you put a footstool under Mr. Poyle's feet," said the Duke of Callowmere. Honora Renfell stared at him. "He is 81, she said, bewildered. "He was going to be very uncomfortable." "Yes, that is not a reason to—" "It is the only reason anyone has given me in 11 years, he said, and heard how it came out, and turned back to the fire before she could see his face. Behind him, nothing. Then the small sound of a woman drawing breath to speak, and letting it go again. "Your Grace," she said at last, and her voice had changed. Some hard edge had gone out of it. "What is to become of me?" "You are to be my wife," he said to the fire, "in 11 weeks. The banns will be read at Callowmere and at St. Bride's, and the county will come and eat my food and watch your hands to see if they shake." He put his palm flat on the marble of the chimney-piece. It was cold. Everything in that house was always cold, unless— He turned round. Unless you would rather be ruined, he said. I will not pretend to you that I am a kind man. You would find me out inside a week and think worse of me for the lie. But I will tell you the truth, which is rarer and more useful. If you wish to be released, say so now, tonight, and I will take the whole weight of it. I will announce tomorrow that I overstepped, that I mistook a courtesy for consent, that the fault was mine entire. The county will call me a fool and you a woman used. But you will be able to marry where you choose, and no door in England will close to you, and I will settle enough on you that you need never hold another woman's shawls as long as you live. He had not known he was going to say it until it was said. She sat very still in the wing chair, in the made-over grey silk, with the firelight on her raw pink hands. You would do that, she said. You would let the whole county laugh at you. Yes. Why? Because you did not know, said Theodoric Vane, and I did. The clock on the chimney-piece struck 2. Somewhere below, the last carriage crunched away down the gravel, carrying the story into every drawing-room within 30 miles. Honora Renfrew stood up. She was not tall. She came to about his shoulder, and she looked up at him with those grey, unremarkable eyes that were not, he was beginning to think, unremarkable at all. No, she said. No, I will not be released. Not out of ambition, your grace. You may put that suspicion down. You are carrying it about like a lantern, and it is very tiresome. I have no wish to be a duchess. I have no notion how to be one, and I dare say I shall be extremely bad at it. She drew a breath. But you have just offered to break yourself in half in front of 300 people to spare a woman you met 4 hours ago, and I find I cannot let man do that. Not for me. Not for a footstool. He could not speak. So, she said, and she put out her hand, her bare hand, the raw one, the mended one, exactly as he had put out his an hour and a lifetime ago in the middle of the ballroom. Marry me on purpose, then, since we must. And let us at least be honest with one another, which is more than most people manage. The Duke of Callowmere looked at that hand for a long moment. Then he took it. The county did not laugh. The county did something far worse. It came to look. For 3 weeks, the drive at Callowmere was never empty. They arrived in barouches and gigs and one memorable landau with a crest so recently painted that it smelled, and they came to see the Duke's mistake, and they stayed to be given tea by her. Theodoric watched from the window of the North Library, which had a view of the sweep and a door he could bolt. They come here to sneer at her, he said, and she gives them cake. Very good cake, your grace, said Coombe, by all accounts. He should have found it contemptible, a woman ingratiating herself, buying her way into a station she had stumbled into. He had seen it done all his life, the long, slow campaign of the ambitious, and he waited for the familiar cold contempt to fold over him like a coat. It did not come. Because she was not ingratiating herself, he had stood twice now in the shadow of the door and listened. You will forgive me, Miss Renfrew, Mrs. Avery Dean had said, in a voice like sugared vinegar, but one does wonder what a young woman of no fortune whatever can bring to a house like this. Very little, Honora had agreed. It is a great deal less than the house brings to me, and I am uneasy about the balance of it. Do have another slice. The cook has been up since 5, and she will be wounded if it goes back. And Mrs. Avery Dean, who had come armed for battle and found nothing to push against, had eaten the cake. Coombe, said Theodoric, still at the glass. When my father was alive, did anyone in this house? He stopped. He had not said the sort of thing one does not say aloud since he was 19. Never mind. Did anyone laugh in it? Said Coombe quite calmly. No, your grace. Not once in 40 years that I heard. The kitchens laughed now. He had heard it coming up the back stairs, a burst of it, and under it her voice, dry as a dropped leaf, saying something he could not catch, and then more laughing. His own kitchens. He had stood on the stair like a man outside a lighted window, and gone away again before anyone could see him and stop. She made a great many mistakes. She curtsied to a bishop as though he were a duke, and to a duke as though he were a bishop. She learned the names of every one of the 11 under-gardeners, and none of the peerage. At her first dinner as his betrothed, she sat at his right hand in a gown Lady Marchmain had chosen, pale blue, expensive, wrong, and looked for the first time since he had known her, small. He watched the table turn its attention on her the way weather turns on a hillside. Miss Renfrew. Lady Emmeline Harrow, sweetly. Do tell us, is it true you were a companion? Quite true. How very novel. And what did one do? One read aloud, said Honora, for 4 hours a day, to a lady who was not deaf but liked to pretend she was, so that she might hear what people said of her when they thought she could not. A ripple. Not laughter yet. The table was waiting to see which way the Duke would jump before it committed itself. And what did they say? Asked Lady Emin. Everything, said Honora, that they would say of me now, if I were out of the room. The silence went absolutely rigid. And Theodoric Vane, 9th Duke of Callowmere, set down his glass and heard himself say into it, in the flat cold voice that 3 counties feared, "Then it is fortunate she is in it. Lady Emmeline, you were telling me about the windows. It was not much. It was, he thought afterward, an extremely small thing. But he saw her hand at the edge of his vision, on the white cloth unclenched November, rain on the long gallery windows, and Callowmere gone grey to its bones. He found her in the muniment room which nobody entered, sitting on the floor in a spill of skirts with the estate ledgers open around her like a fan. Miss Renfell, your Grace. She did not get up. She did not even look particularly caught. Did you know that Callowmere spends £400 a year on candles? I did not. Nobody does. It is remarkable what nobody knows about this house. It is like a great ship going along in the dark with everyone very busy polishing the rails. She turned a page. Your father's steward, the one before Coombe, was robbing you. Not much. Steadily. From about 1808, Theodoric came and stood over her. The rain went on at the window. How do you know that? Because I have spent 9 years being poor in other people's houses, your Grace, and there is no education on earth like it. One learns exactly what a pound of tallow costs, and exactly what a dishonest man writes in a ledger when he wishes it to look dull. She tipped her face up to him. There was dust on her cheekbone. Honest accounts are untidy. Only lies are neat. He looked down at her on the floor of his muniment room, in a made-over grey gown, because she would not wear the blue one again. Ink on her fingers, dust on her face, telling him a truth about his own house that no man in his employ had found in 20 years. You are, he said slowly, the strangest woman I have ever met. Yes, she said. I have been told. And she went back to the ledger. He did not go away. He stood there a full half-minute, and then, to his own considerable astonishment, he sat down, on the floor, in a coat that had cost more than her cousin's carriage. Show me, said the Duke of Callowmere. She did not want anything. That was what undid him. Not her wit, though he had begun, without at all meaning to save things up during the day to tell her at dinner. Not her courage. It was that in 11 weeks she never once asked him for a single thing. Not jewels. Lady Marchmain, in a fury of correctness, had had the Callowmere sapphires brought up from the strong room, and Honora had looked at them a long moment and said, "They are very fine, ma'am. Might they be sold?" And had had to have it explained to her twice that they were entailed, that they were part of the house, and she had said, "Ah, then they are not really mine. Then I shall wear them and be careful, as one is careful with a borrowed umbrella. Not him, either." She was courteous. She was warm. She was, he came to understand, at pains never to presume, and he understood at last, with a lurch that turned him cold on the stairs one evening, exactly why. She thought she had been in an accident. She thought he had been trapped. And she had determined, with the same straight-backed composure with which she had curtsied to 300 people, that she would never let him see that it cost her anything. Miss Renfell. She stopped on the stair below him, a candle in her hand, the flame throwing everything upward, the tired eyes, the escaping hair, the small, resolute mouth. Your Grace, you have not asked me, he said, for anything. No, because, said Honora Renfell, you did not ask for me. And she went on up the stairs and left him standing in the dark with the whole cold length of Callowmere at his back. He rode out the next morning before it was light, 10 miles across the frost, and came back with his hands numb and his mind, for once in his life, entirely clear. He found her in the still room with her sleeves pushed up, arguing with the housekeeper about quinces. Miss Renfell, walk with me. The park was white. Their breath went ahead of them in clouds. He walked her the length of the lime avenue without saying one word, and she, being who she was, let him, and did not fill the silence. And only at the end of it, at the stone bench by the Har, where one could see the whole grey bulk of the house lying in its hollow like a sleeping thing, did she say, quietly, You have been unhappy for a long time, I think. He stopped. Yes. Since before me. Since before you were born, he said, and it came out of him like something pulled. She sat down on the cold stone. After a moment he sat too, an arm's length off, and looked at the house. My father, he said, was a great man. Everyone says so. He built the west front, and he never in his life did a warm thing. He told me when I was 9 that Callowmere would eat me if I let it, and the only defense was to be harder than the house. He turned his glove over in his hands. I have been very obedient, and it has made you very lonely. It has made me, he said, a man that 300 people applauded and not one of them liked. I like you, said Honora. He looked at her. She was scarlet, absolutely scarlet, to the ears, staring straight ahead at the house with her chin up as though she were being marched somewhere. That was a stupid thing to say, she said, and you will oblige me by forgetting it, and we shall discuss the Quinces. Miss Renfell. The Quinces, your grace, are a matter of some urgency. Honora. She stopped breathing. He heard her stop. He had never said it before. He had not known, until it was out in the cold air between them, how long he had been carrying it about. Say it again, he said. Say what again? That you like me. His voice was not steady. He did not much care. They like the house. They like the rank. They come here and look at my chandeliers and tell me I am very fortunate. You have never once told me I am fortunate. Because you are not, she said, still to the house. You are one of the unluckiest men I ever met, and you own 11,000 acres, and both those things are true at once, and I have never known how to say so without sounding like an impertinence. He reached out. He'd not touch her. He put his bare hand on the cold stone of the bench an inch from hers and left it there, and after a moment, without turning her head, without a word, she moved her hand very slightly, and the side of her smallest finger came to rest against the side of his. That was all. A quarter of an inch of skin in a white park in November. The Duke of Callowmere sat perfectly still, as though something wild had come out of the trees and settled on him, and might yet be frightened away. Lady Marchmain came to him 9 days before the wedding, and she came, he had to allow honestly. I have done a thing, she said, which you will not forgive. He set down his pen. Then you had better tell me quickly. I offered her money. The room went very quiet. Outside someone was raking the gravel, and the sound of it went on and on, small and ordinary. How much? Said Theodoric. £4,000. His aunt's hands were folded. Her chin was up. She was, he understood, not ashamed in the least. She was merely aware that she had lost. £4,000, settled, and a house at Bath, and her name kept clean. I would have said she had been ill, that the engagement was dissolved by mutual consent, that she had gone abroad for her health. It has been done before. It would have been done cleanly, and she refused. She did not refuse. Lady Marchmain's mouth moved oddly. She asked me a question. He waited. She asked me, said his aunt, whether you had sent me. The raking went on outside. I told her no, said Lady Marchmain. I am not a liar, whatever else I am. And she said. She stopped. She looked, for the first time in the 11 years he had known her, as mistress of nothing and arbiter of everything, uncertain of her ground. She said, then I shall not take it, ma'am, because he offered me a way out himself on the very first night, before there was a farthing in it for him either way, and a man who does that is not a man one leaves for £4,000 and a house at Bath. Theodoric did not move. And then she thanked me, said his aunt, with an air of grievance, for the trouble I had taken, and she gave me tea. He stood up and went to the window. I have been 40 years in this family, said Lady Marchmain behind him, and I have watched it eat every soft thing it could reach. Your mother, your brother, God rest him. You, Theodoric, I watched it eat you, and I told myself it was breeding. A long breath. I came here to save you from a penniless girl in a made-over gown. I find I have been trying to save you from the only person who has ever once in your life wanted you. The gravel rake scraped and scraped. Aunt, he said, without turning round, and his voice was not quite his own. Would you be so good as to see that the sapphires are cleaned? Behind him, after a moment, the small dry sound of a woman who has decided not to weep. Yes, said Lady Marchmain. Yes, I think I would. He did not go to her that evening. He sat instead in the library where he had first offered her a way out, and he looked at the wing chair by the fire, and he understood at last, with the slow, terrible clarity of a man watching a wave come in, what he had done. He had bound a woman to him by accident, and then he had been fool enough, worse, coward enough, to be glad of it. He had let 11 weeks go by. He had let her mend his ledgers and warm his kitchens, and put her finger against his in a frozen park. And in all that time he had never once said the thing that mattered, because to say was to hand her a weapon, and he had been taught, at 9 years old, in this room, by a great man who never did a warm thing, that a vain does not hand anybody a weapon. She thought she had been an accident. She was going to walk up the aisle of St. Bride's in 8 days, believing that she was a mistake he was too honourable to correct. She had refused £4,000 rather than shame him. The Duke of Callowmere put his face in his hands, alone, in the dark, in the middle of his own great house, and made the only decision of his life that he was ever entirely proud of. He found her the next morning in the herb garden, cutting rosemary, because she said the church would smell of damp and somebody ought to do something about it. Miss Renfell. Honora, she said, not looking up. You said it once. You may as well go on. Honora. He put his hands behind his back because they were unsteady, and a vain does not, and then he took them out again and let them be unsteady, and stood there like a man before a magistrate. I am releasing you. The shears stopped. She straightened very slowly. The rosemary was in her left hand. Her face had gone the colour of paper, exactly as it had gone in the middle of the last dance, and her chin did not tremble, and he thought, she has practiced this. She has been practicing this for 11 weeks. She has been waiting for it. I see, she said. You do not. Your Grace, I assure you I see perfectly well, and there is no need whatever for you do not see, said Theodoric, and it is my fault, and I am going to say a great many things very badly, and you will oblige me by not being brave at me until I have finished. She shut her mouth. I am releasing you, he said, from the last dance, from the custom and the county and the banns and every particle of the thing that was done to you in my ballroom on the 14th of September, without your knowledge or your consent. It is finished. As of this moment you are bound to me by nothing at all. Lady Marchmain will say what needs saying, and I will be thought a scoundrel, and it does not matter in the least. It matters, she said. Her voice cracked on it. It matters, you cannot. Honora. He took one step. There is not a man in England who would let you go. She stared at him. So you must understand, he said, that I am not letting you go. I am taking away the chain, because I find I cannot bear to be loved by a woman who has no choice about it, and I discovered, some weeks ago, on a stone bench in the cold, that being loved by you was the only thing I have ever wanted in my life, and that I would rather have nothing than have it by force. The rosemary fell out of her hand. So there is no custom now, he said. There is no county and no scandal and no ruin and no honour and nothing whatever holding either of us to the other. There is only a rather cold man of 38, standing in a herb garden, with no fortune to offer you that you have not already told me you do not want, and no charm, as you have frequently observed, and one thing only. He went down. He went down on one knee in the wet earth, in a coat that had cost more than her cousin's carriage, and he looked up at her, and the Duke of Callowmere, whom 3 counties had never seen bend, was not cold at all. Marry me, he said. Not because you took my hand in front of 300 people, not because you cannot escape it. Marry me because you put a footstool under an old man's feet when nobody was looking. Marry me because you told me I was unlucky, and no one has ever told me the truth in this house before. Marry me because when you laugh in my kitchens I stand on the stairs like a beggar and listen. His voice went. He let it. Marry me on purpose, Honora. I am asking. It is the first thing I have ever asked anybody for. For a long moment she did not move at all. Then she sat down. Straight down in the wet earth in front of him, so that their faces were level, which no one in the history of Callowmere had ever done, and she put both her hands, the raw ones, the mended ones, flat against his face. Theodoric Vane, she said, you great cold stupid honourable man. Is that a yes? She was crying. She was crying and laughing and absolutely furious all at once. Yes, on purpose. Yes, if you had asked me in the ballroom with 300 people watching I should have said yes, and if you had asked me on the stairs. And if you had asked me on that horrible bench when my hands were like ice, And if you ask me every day for 40 years, I shall go on saying it. And I want it written down and witnessed that I said yes to you in a herb garden with nothing in the world hanging on it. Not one thing. Because you are not a house, Theodric, and you are not 11,000 acres, and I did not fall in love with your chandeliers. He did not remember standing up. He remembered only that she was against him, and that her hands were fisted in the front of his coat, and that he had his mouth against her hair and could not have said one word if the whole county had asked him to. Say it, he managed. I have said it. Say it in the words. I want you, said Honora Renfell, into his shoulder, fierce as a struck match. You. And the Duke of Callowmere in the wet earth among the rosemary held on to her like a drowning man who has been thrown a rope and does not intend to be sensible about it. They were married 8 days later at St. Bride's, and the church smelled of rosemary. The county came. Of course the county came. The county would have come to a hanging. It filed in under the grey stone and the wet November light, and it sat down in its pews with its fans and its opinions, and it waited with real appetite to see the Duke of Callowmere marry his mistake. What it saw was this. It saw a woman come up the aisle in a gown of ivory silk that was not new. It had been her mother's, and she had had it made over, and she had told the horrified dressmaker that she had spent 9 years being made over herself and had a great respect for the process. It saw the Callowmere sapphires at her throat worn, as she had promised carefully, like a borrowed umbrella. It saw Lady Marchmain in the front pew, sitting so straight that she appeared to be holding the roof up, weeping without moving a single muscle of her face, and it saw the Duke turn. Nobody in that church had ever seen him turn. He had stood at the head of his own table for 11 years like a man carved on a tomb, and now, in front of the whole assembled county, he turned round at the sound of her step, and he looked at her coming toward him, and his face, his cold, exacting, guarded face, the face his father had built, simply gave way. Old Mr. Poyle, who was 81, and who had been given the best seat in the church by the express and unanswerable order of the bride, leaned over to his neighbour and said, far too loudly, well, there now, she's warmed him. She had, and the county which had come for a hanging found itself unaccountably dabbing its eyes. Afterward, long afterward, when the last carriage had crunched away down the gravel and the great house lay quiet, and the candles were going out one by one along the gallery, the Duke of Callowmere stood with his wife at the end of the ballroom where it had all begun. The floor was empty. The chandeliers had been let down and the crystal drops still turned a little, catching what light was left. £400 a year, said Honora, in candles. 320, he said. You have economized. Coombe's beside himself. She laughed. It went up into all that dark space and came back. He put out his hand. He did it exactly as he had done it before. The gloved hand, the level look, the whole cold ceremony of it. And she looked at it, and then up at him, with the firelight in her grey, unremarkable eyes. Your Grace, she said, you should be careful. Where I come from, that means something. It means, said Theodric Vane, that I am asking my wife to dance with me in an empty room with no music and nobody watching, because I have discovered that I do not care in the least for the county, and I have never in my life wanted anything the way I want to be alone with you. There is no music, then we shall have to be very inventive. She put her hand in his, and the 9th Duke of Callowmere, who had been told at 9 years old that the house would eat him if he let it, danced the lance of his life with the woman who had taken it by mistake, badly, in the dark, laughing on the same square of polished parquet where 300 people had once drawn breath as one animal, and the great cold house stood round them, and for the first time in 400 years it did not feel like a house at all. It felt like a home. Much later on the stairs, with a single candle between them, she stopped and said, You would truly have let me go, in the herb garden, if I had said no. Yes. You would have been ruined. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment in the candlelight. Then I shall spend the rest of my life, said the Duchess of Callowmere, seeing to it that you are never sorry. He took the candle out of her hand and set it down on the stair, and there is no more of this that is anybody's business.